Daniel had grown accustomed to silence in his home. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, strained quiet that sat between him and Mark like a pane of glass. Married for nearly a decade, their life was orderly, respectable, predictable, yet marked by an absence Daniel dared not name aloud. Mark's laughter had grown rare, his touches mechanical. Their nights ended in the same way. Two bodies lying parallel but never colliding, their intimacy replaced by routine. That night, Daniel sat alone in the living room, a glass of wine in hand, scrolling absently through headlines he did not care about. Mark had gone to bed early, pleading exhaustion, as he often did. Daniel told himself he didn't mind. Loneliness was easier when you pretended it was chosen. Then came the knock. It was sharp, almost desperate, cutting through the monotony like a blade. Daniel frowned, checked the clock, past 11. No one came at that hour unless something was wrong. He set down his glass and walked to the door, pulse quickening. When he opened it, he froze. Ethan. His oldest friend, the boy who had once been his roommate, his secret crush, his almost everything, now standing on the doorstep, trembling, his eyes red and hollow. Daniel's heart leapt into his throat. He hadn't seen Ethan in nearly a year, not since the messy divorce that had torn through his friend's life like a wildfire. Dan, Ethan whispered, voice cracked. I didn't know where else to go. The words hit Daniel like a confession. He stepped aside without thinking, pulling Ethan into the warmth of the house. The air between them charged instantly, a current of memory and suppressed desire. Ethan looked fragile, his tall frame slightly bent, his hands clenched as though to hold himself together. His coat hung open, rain darkening the shoulders. He smelled of cold air and desperation. Daniel guided him to the couch. Sit. I'll get you something warm. As Daniel boiled water for tea, he tried to steady himself. This was Ethan, his Ethan, the one who once made his chest ache with longing. Back then, they had lived side by side, brushing teeth together, laughing until dawn, never admitting what lingered in their silences. Daniel had chosen safety, marriage to Mark, a respectable life. Ethan had chosen risk, a husband, love openly declared, only to watch it all collapse. Now here he was, raw and shaking in Daniel's living room. Daniel handed Ethan a steaming mug, their fingers brushing. The contact jolted them both. Ethan looked up, eyes wide, searching. Daniel forced a smile, the kind meant to soothe. Drink. You'll feel better. Ethan obeyed, sipping slowly. The silence between them thickened. Finally, Ethan said, I thought I could handle it. The loneliness. The empty apartment. But tonight I just couldn't. His voice broke on the last word. Daniel's chest tightened. He reached out, resting a hand on Ethan's knee, a gesture meant as comfort but weighted with something else. Ethan didn't pull away. You're safe here, Daniel murmured, and meant it more deeply than he intended. The moment stretched. Daniel studied Ethan's face, the sharp jaw he had once traced in dreams, the lips too familiar, the sadness carved into every line. Desire mingled with compassion until Daniel couldn't tell one from the other. Ethan set the cup down with trembling fingers. Do you ever regret? Daniel blinked. Regret what? Choices. Roads we didn't take. The question burned. Daniel thought of Mark upstairs, sleeping in their bed, oblivious. He thought of late nights in college when he and Ethan had lain side by side, inches apart, never crossing the invisible line. Yes, Daniel admitted softly, the words slipping out like a secret he'd held too long. Their eyes locked. No more words followed. Ethan leaned back, exhaustion dragging at him, yet his gaze stayed tethered to Daniel's. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rain outside. Daniel wanted to look away, to retreat to safety, but he couldn't. Something had shifted, something dangerous yet inevitable. Ethan was no longer just a friend seeking comfort. He was the embodiment of Daniel's buried longing. Mark's absence pressed into the scene like a ghost. Upstairs, the marriage waited, cold and untouched. Downstairs, Temptation breathed in the space between two men who had once nearly been more than friends. Daniel adjusted the blanket around Ethan's shoulders, his fingers brushing the curve of his neck. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, as if savoring the touch. "Thank you," Ethan whispered. The words carried more weight than gratitude. They felt like an invitation. Daniel's heart hammered. He should send Ethan to the guest room, should put walls back where lines were blurring. But he didn't move. Instead, he sat close, their knees almost touching, the silence thick with possibilities neither dared name. In that suspended moment, Daniel understood the danger. This night was not just about offering comfort. It was about awakening something both of them had kept buried for years. And now, with Ethan's silent cry answered, Daniel knew the hardest choices still lay ahead. The house was still, but Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. Ethan sat beside him, cocooned in a blanket, eyes fixed on the floor as though words might spill out if he dared look up. Daniel wanted to ease his pain, to shoulder it, yet the weight pressing on his chest wasn't only compassion, it was desire, undeniable and reckless. "Tell me," Daniel urged softly, "what brought you here tonight?" Ethan hesitated, then exhaled. "It's everything. The divorce papers, the silence of that empty apartment, the way I keep reaching for someone who isn't there anymore. I thought I was strong enough. I thought I could start over. But tonight, Dan, tonight I felt like I was disappearing." The confession cracked something open in Daniel. He tightened his hand on Ethan's knee, the gesture no longer neutral. "You're not disappearing," he said firmly. "Not while I'm here." Ethan finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were glassy, wounded, yet lit by a flicker Daniel recognized instantly: longing. It mirrored his own. For years, Daniel had buried that look in the shadows of memory. Now it was alive again, staring straight at him. The air thickened. Daniel's throat went dry. He wanted to stand, to walk away, to escape before lines blurred beyond repair. But Ethan's presence pinned him, magnetic, irresistible. "Mark still asleep upstairs?" Ethan asked quietly, the name spoken with a hint of apology. Daniel swallowed. "Yes." "And you?" Ethan pressed. "Are you happy with him?" The question cut deep. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. He searched for a safe answer, but none came. Honesty clawed its way out instead. "No. Not really." Ethan's lips parted, a sharp breath escaping as though the admission mattered more than anything else. "I always wondered," he said, voice hushed, "if things had gone differently between us back then." Daniel's heart pounded. He remembered those nights in their college dorm, Ethan stretched across the bed in shorts, laughter spilling freely, the way Daniel's chest burned with an ache he never dared voice. He had chosen silence then. Tonight's silence felt impossible. Daniel shifted closer. Their knees touched. The contact was electric. Ethan didn't move away. "I thought about you," Ethan whispered. "During the worst of it. About how safe I felt with you. About what we never said." Daniel's breath caught. He reached out, fingers brushing Ethan's hand. Ethan turned his palm upward, accepting, almost pleading. The touch was small, but it detonated between them. Years of restraint unraveled in that fragile contact. "Ethan," Daniel's voice was low, warning and want tangled together. "I don't need promises," Ethan interrupted, eyes shining with desperate clarity. "I just need to feel wanted again. Even for a moment." The plea was a blade. Daniel's defenses split. He leaned in, the world narrowing to Ethan's face, Ethan's breath, Ethan's waiting silence. Their lips met, tentative at first, then surging with urgency. The kiss was not gentle. It was a dam-breaking. Daniel's hand cupped Ethan's jaw, pulling him closer. Ethan's fingers clutched at Daniel's shirt, anchoring himself as if afraid Daniel might vanish. When they pulled apart, breathless, Daniel's guilt slammed into him like a tidal wave. God, I shouldn't." But Ethan pressed a finger to his lips. "Don't. Not tonight. Please." Daniel's body trembled with conflict. Upstairs, Mark slept in their shared bed, oblivious. Down here, Daniel burned with a need he had denied for too long. He looked at Ethan, truly looked. Not at the broken man left behind by a failed marriage, but at the friend who had once been his secret dream. That unspoken truth pulsed between them now, undeniable. Ethan leaned into him again, resting his forehead against Daniel's. Their breaths mingled, ragged, charged. Daniel whispered, "If we keep going, there's no turning back." Ethan's answer was immediate, raw. "Maybe I don't want to turn back." The honesty in those words shook Daniel to his core. For years, he had lived by rules, by appearances, by the safety of a marriage that looked whole but felt hollow. Ethan's vulnerability threatened to tear all of it apart. And yet, Daniel craved it, craved him. The clock ticked in the background, each second stretching into eternity. Finally, Daniel pulled Ethan closer again, not with hesitation this time but with certainty. The kiss was slower, deeper, steeped in everything they had buried. Ethan sighed into it, a sound of surrender. When they broke apart once more, neither spoke. Words would have spoiled the fragile, dangerous spell weaving itself around them. Daniel knew they had crossed a threshold. The man sitting beside him was no longer just a friend seeking comfort. He was the embodiment of everything Daniel both feared and desired. As they settled into silence, Daniel's arm wrapped around Ethan's shoulders. Ethan leaned into him, eyes closing, trusting. For the first time that night, his trembling stilled. Daniel stared ahead, his mind a storm. He knew what they had unleashed could not be contained. Yet as Ethan's head rested against his chest, Daniel also knew one thing with terrifying clarity. He wasn't ready to stop. The night had only just begun. Daniel stood at the edge of himself, torn between the man upstairs and the one sitting beside him. The house seemed smaller now, the walls pressing inward, every shadow vibrating with the secret they had already birthed. Ethan's head rested against his chest, steadying, trusting. That simple weight, so intimate, so dangerous, felt heavier than anything Daniel had carried in years. "You should go to the guest room," Daniel said, though his voice lacked conviction. It sounded hollow, a rule spoken for the sake of form. Ethan stirred but didn't move. "Do you want me to?" The question cut deeper than it should have. Daniel's breath stuttered. He wanted to say yes, to restore order, to draw the line before it vanished entirely. But when he opened his mouth, the truth slipped out instead. "No." Ethan lifted his face, their eyes locking. There was no mistaking what lingered there. Hunger, need, and the quiet, desperate hope of a man who had been starved of affection. Daniel's resolve collapsed. He kissed him again. This time it was not tentative. Their mouths collided with urgency, teeth grazing, breaths mingling in uneven bursts. Ethan clutched Daniel's shirt as if anchoring himself to life itself. Daniel's hands explored with reckless abandon, the curve of Ethan's back, the strength of his shoulders, the warmth he had long imagined but never dared to touch. Every barrier Daniel had built over the years cracked and crumbled. The years of dutiful silence, of lying beside Mark in a bed that felt like stone, all of it burned away in Ethan's arms. "God, Dan," Ethan breathed between kisses, his voice hoarse with need. "I need this. I need you." The words ignited him. Daniel pushed Ethan back gently against the couch, hovering over him, their bodies pressed in dangerous alignment. His heart thundered, not just from desire but from the knowledge of what he was breaking. "Tell me to stop," Daniel whispered, giving Ethan one last chance to pull away. But Ethan's response was immediate, raw. "Don't you dare." The plea sealed their fate. Daniel's lips trailed down Ethan's jaw, his neck, each kiss both a confession and a betrayal. Ethan's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, desperate. Upstairs, Mark slept, unaware of the storm raging beneath his roof. The thought should have paralyzed Daniel. Instead, it fueled the urgency, every touch a rebellion against the emptiness that had grown in his marriage. Clothes were shed with frantic hands, not in ceremony but in survival. Flesh met flesh, and the years of restraint gave way to fevered contact. Their movements were messy, imperfect, human, Two men clutching at each other as if the world might split open without this union. It wasn't just sex. It was confession. Every kiss declared what had been buried. Every gasp, every shiver was an admission. I wanted this all along. Ethan's voice cracked with a moan, his body arching beneath Daniel's. Don't stop, he pleaded again, and Daniel obeyed, surrendering to the fire between them. The room filled with the sounds of need, breathless whispers, stifled groans, the rhythm of bodies giving in. Daniel knew he was crossing a line that could never be redrawn. But in that moment, he didn't care. The weight of years lifted from him, replaced by a fierce, intoxicating sense of being alive. When it ended, they lay tangled together, their chests rising and falling in sync. Sweat cooled on their skin, and reality began its slow return. Daniel's first thought was guilt. The image of Mark waiting upstairs stabbed at him, sharp and merciless. He turned his face into the crook of Ethan's shoulder, ashamed of the relief he felt. Ethan spoke first, his voice quiet, almost childlike. I didn't think I'd ever feel this again. Daniel swallowed hard. We shouldn't have, his words faltered, his hand still resting on Ethan's chest, unwilling to let go. Ethan covered it with his own. Maybe not. But I don't regret it. The honesty scorched Daniel. He wished he could echo it freely, but the weight of betrayal pressed too heavily against his ribs. Instead, he lay there, torn between shame and satisfaction, between duty and desire. Minutes stretched, silence thickening. Ethan eventually shifted, propping himself on one elbow to look down at Daniel. His gaze was steady, unflinching. Do you regret me? The question lodged in Daniel's throat. He wanted to say no, wanted to tell Ethan he had waited years for this, that he had dreamt of it in the quiet corners of his marriage. But fear kept him silent. Ethan's expression flickered, as if he had seen the answer anyway. He leaned down, kissed Daniel softly, a gentler echo of their earlier hunger. Then don't lie to me. Not tonight. Daniel closed his eyes, heart pounding. He knew this night would not fade easily. It would cling to him, demand answers he wasn't ready to give. As Ethan settled back against him, Daniel stared at the ceiling. Upstairs, his marriage slept untouched. Down here, betrayal breathed warm and alive in his arms. And for the first time in years, Daniel wondered which life was truly his. Morning arrived like an intruder. Pale light seeped through the blinds, illuminating the wreckage of the night. The discarded blanket, the half-empty mugs, the clothes scattered in silent testimony. Daniel stirred awake on the couch, his body tangled with Ethan's. For a fleeting second, he felt peace, the rare kind that comes when longing has finally been met. Then memory struck, and the peace shattered. He pulled back slightly, his breath catching. Upstairs, Mark slept in the marital bed, unaware. Down here, Daniel's betrayal lay warm against his skin. Ethan's eyes fluttered open. He looked softer in the morning light, but no less broken. Hey, he whispered, voice rough with sleep. Daniel managed a faint smile, though guilt gnawed at him. Hey. For a moment, neither moved. They simply breathed together, sharing the fragile silence. But reality pressed in, sharp and unyielding. Daniel sat up, raking a hand through his hair. You should probably, he began, but stopped. The words felt cruel. Go! Ethan finished for him. Daniel winced. It's not that I want you to. It's just… Mark. Ethan's laugh was hollow, short. Of course. Mark. He sat up too, pulling the blanket around himself like armor. His eyes flicked to Daniel, searching. Do you regret it? The question hung heavy in the air. Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to deny it, to reassure Ethan, to say last night had been more than a mistake. But fear held him back. I don't know, he said finally, the coward's answer. Ethan's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Instead, he rose, gathering his clothes with quiet efficiency. Each movement felt like a closing door. Daniel watched, helpless. Part of him wanted to stop Ethan, to beg him to stay, to confess that last night had been the most alive he'd felt in years. But another part, the married man, the dutiful husband, demanded silence. When Ethan pulled on his coat, he paused at the door. His back remained to Daniel. "Thank you," he said softly, "for answering when I knocked." The words pierced Daniel deeper than any accusation. Before he could respond, Ethan opened the door and stepped into the morning, leaving the chill of absence behind him. The silence that followed was unbearable. Daniel sat frozen on the couch, staring at the door, his body aching with both loss and guilt. He wanted to chase after Ethan, but his legs refused to move. Instead, he climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. Mark was still asleep, curled on his side, the picture of oblivious peace. Daniel slipped into bed beside him, the sheets cool and unfamiliar after the warmth he had just left. Mark stirred faintly, murmuring, "You stayed up late." "Yeah," Daniel whispered. His voice cracked, but Mark didn't notice. He turned over and drifted back into sleep, leaving Daniel staring at the ceiling, suffocated by silence. The rest of the morning moved in fragments. Breakfast with Mark felt rehearsed, mechanical. Daniel poured coffee, buttered toast, responded to questions about errands and schedules with nods and half-smiles. On the surface, everything appeared normal. Beneath it, Daniel's insides screamed. He kept replaying the night, the way Ethan had looked at him, the way need had turned into something raw and undeniable. Every touch replayed in vivid detail, searing him with equal parts longing and shame. When Mark left for work, kissing Daniel's cheek absently at the door, the hollowness deepened. Daniel stood in the quiet house, staring at the empty space Ethan had filled only hours ago. The weight of silence crushed him. Confess? Deny? Pretend nothing had happened? None of the choices seemed survivable. He sat at the table, head in his hands. He had thought last night would break Ethan's loneliness. He hadn't realized it would break him too. By noon, Daniel found himself back in the living room, staring at the couch where it had all unraveled. The blanket still held Ethan's scent. He gripped it, pressing his face into the fabric, torn between sobbing and holding on. Every knock at the door echoed now in his memory. That sound had changed everything. He couldn't unhear it, couldn't undo what followed. And yet, he didn't regret Ethan. Not truly. What he regretted was the silence that would now define them. The love never spoken, the truth never confessed. That night, when Mark sat beside him watching television, Daniel felt the chasm widen. Mark laughed at a joke on screen, oblivious, while Daniel's thoughts drifted to Ethan. His voice, his eyes, the warmth of his body pressed against his. He realized then that silence was no longer neutral. Silence was its own betrayal. As the credits rolled, Mark stood to head upstairs. Daniel remained on the couch, staring at the door. His chest tightened, his pulse quickened as if expecting another knock. But the house stayed still, mocking him with its emptiness. He whispered Ethan's name under his breath, a sound too soft for anyone but himself. The marriage carried on above him. The betrayal lingered inside him. And the door remained closed, holding secrets that refused to die.